Appreciate the introduction. As I mentioned, my name is Kerri Wise and I work for TrueCar. I've been working in the automotive industry for 20 years and this is my very first NADA. I speak at most of the conferences and proud to be in my hometown. I grew up about an hour away from here. Don't judge me depending on your political leanings. But I love this area and now reside in Los Angeles. As I mentioned, I worked in this industry for 20 years, and there's so many of you, it's hard to have an interactive session with so many people. But if you don't mind, I do this before I speak at every conference, if you don't mind standing up, we're going to do a quick little exercise. I promise I won't call on any individual, but I want to get to know you guys quickly. So we have a lot of people, including my friend from Portugal here. But if you have been working in the automotive business for less than 5 years, have a seat. For less than 10 years, have a seat. For less than 15 years, have a seat. For less than 20 years, have a seat. 25 years, have a seat. 30 years, have a seat. Sorry, I'm going to age some of you guys here. 35 years, have a seat. 40 years, have a seat. Wow, 2 men standing. 45 years, have a seat. Oh, both of you are in tie. I want to get your information. Stand up. Let's give them a round of applause for their amazing careers. And that's why I love this industry. If you saw, we had some people sit down within 5 years. We had people that were at over 45 years in the business. And I think that's what's amazing, particularly when it comes to digital marketing. Because the person that has been in the industry for 5 years can know just as much as the person that's been in the industry for 45 years when it comes to digital marketing, right? So much has evolved and changed. And I appreciate both sides of the spectrum. I appreciate the person that's been in the industry for 40 years because they've seen it all. They've been through a lot. I've only been in the industry for 20 years and I remember when the car business tanked, right? We all remember those years. They were painful. And imagine somebody who's been in the industry for 40 years, what they've seen and the things that they have seen change. But we also have to respect the person that's been in the industry for 5 years because a lot of times they're bringing fresh new ideas. And as it relates to digital marketing, that can be powerful. They might relate to the consumer better, maybe because of their age bracket. And so everything's changing and we all have to be students of the business. I call SOBs, students of the business. Today I want to talk to you about some digital marketing myths. And my background is a lot in consumer insights. I spent a lot of time understanding the consumer. I've listened to thousands and thousands of dealership phone calls. I've mystery shopped thousands and thousands of dealers. And I've spent a lot of time in the stores working with dealers and the experience. And so I tend to lean in on more of the consumer experience because I think if we can understand the consumer, not just the consumers that are in our store, but the consumer that's going to be in there 10 years from now, we're ahead of the game. The most successful digital marketers, think of Amazon, have mastered the consumer. They haven't mastered beating their competitors. They've mastered how to basically have a value prop for the consumer. So we're going to talk about 5 digital marketing myths that can hurt your bottom line. I want to give you some background on where this insights come from. I don't give my opinion, or I try not to. At least the only person I give my opinion to a lot is my husband. But outside of that, I want to be fact and database, and so we do a ton of research at TrueCar. In fact, last year we tracked about 20,000 consumers online. And what we wanted to see is, and by the way, they agreed to that, but we wanted to understand how are they shopping for a vehicle? Because there's a lot of myths and data points that are thrown out there by vendors, by dealers, by consultants on what's happening with the consumer. But what if we actually watched them in action? We understood what OEM sites they went to, what dealership sites they went to, how they used paid search. What about how they interacted with third-party websites? We also were able to track them once they actually went into a dealership. So we knew they were geocoded and knew when they actually walked into a dealership. And what's more important, we actually surveyed them once they left the dealership. So about 1,000 of them agreed to a survey right after they left the dealership. Now, why that's important is there's a lot of marketing research out there. The only problem is they're surveying consumers 2 months, 3 months after they buy a car. If you ask a consumer about what they felt like 3 months ago, it tends to skew the data. So we wanted to hit them right after they left the store. But it's not just about the consumer. I also want to share with you some dealer insights. One of the things that we challenged ourselves to do is understand our highest closing dealers, understand our most profitable dealers, understand our trade dealers that acquire vehicles in a more efficient way than other dealers. And so we looked at our highest closing dealers and produced what we call the 10 habits of highly successful dealers. And what we did was we mystery shopped them, we observed their process, we interviewed their management to understand what tactics they were using that was different that allowed them to close 2 times better than their average. And so some of those insights will be included in this presentation as well. So let's jump into it and start with the challenge. So as I mentioned, I've been in the business for 20 years, and I remember 20 years ago, right, Google was just coming out. It was an exciting time when it came to digital. And I remember working at a marketing research company in automotive, I'll just say it, J.D. Power and Associates, and we were looking at digital marketing trends with consumers, and newspaper, right, was still a prevalent way consumers found vehicles, and dealers were really leaning in on that. But we started to see digital kind of creep its way up. That was back in the day when we would say the internet will never be alive, the internet's not real, right? But we found that it was real, right? That consumers started to grasp that. Even in the last 2 years, you can see that the digital share of ad spend that dealers are spending has dramatically increased from 28% of their ad spend only in 2015 to half of their ad spend in 2017. And many of you might be spending a lot more. I find dealers spending a lot more than even that on digital. Now, the promise of digital was that it was going to be a much more targeted, efficient way of reaching consumers. It was going to be much more efficient than your typical billboard that consumers are driving by, they may not be in the market for a car, and you're wasting money on it, and when this person is not going to buy a car. In digital, you're supposed to be able to target this consumer and not waste money on someone that's not in the market for a car. But what's upsetting or disappointing is that dealers over the last 10 years are still spending the same amount per new vehicle sold on advertising in the last 10 years. It's remained flat. You would have thought that it would have declined, that we'd be much more efficient to actually attract a new car buyer. We're still spending about $600 per new vehicle sold on advertising. So why is that? Well, there's many reasons, right? And it's much more competitive to attract a consumer today, maybe than it was 10 years ago. But also what's happening is that we're spending money on things that aren't necessarily driving sales. Or we have no visibility to inspect whether things are actually working. And that's not an accusation at the people in the room here. The reality is it's very complicated. All of you have vendors coming in your office every day with the best solution, the best way to reach car buyers. If you look at all the vendors, all of our slogans are reach more car buyers, right? Reach more car buyers. So it's confusing out there. There's a lot of consultants that have their point of views on how to best reach the car buyers. And so it's really hard to sift through what is true, what is fact, what is a myth. How do I sift through and how do I make decisions not based on my instinct, but based on data, based on the consumer's actual behavior, based on the consumer's actual perception and the trend on where it's going. And so there's a lot of wasted marketing dollars. And when we talk about the bottom line, profitability continues to get squeezed. And we tend to think of the front end. How can we get more out of the consumer? But the reality is that wasting marketing dollars definitely affects your bottom line. It's your cost to sell a new car. And if we can be more efficient in this way, it impacts our profitability. So what are we basing our marketing decisions on? Are they myths or are they facts? Are they truths 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or are they truths today? Do they meet where the consumer is today? And do they match their typical behavior? And that's what I want to share with you today. So the 5 digital marketing myths that I am going to talk about today, and there's many of them, are these. So my dealer's unique value is clear to consumers. That's number 1, and we'll dig into that one. But my unique value is clear, and maybe the better word is differentiated relative to other dealers. I can generate leads more efficiently on my own. I want first-party leads only, and I can do it on my own. Most consumers prefer to complete the entire purchase experience online, right? We're in the world of digital retailing, and full disclosure, TrueCar just acquired Dealer Science, a digital retailing platform. So digital retailing is hot, and that's what you're probably hearing from some vendors, really, from digital retailing vendors. My strategy with digital consumers is different than walk-ins. And lastly, views, clicks, and leads equals sales. So we're going to dig into a few of these, really digging into the consumer behavior behind it, and then showing some dealers that are doing well in various aspects of these. So my dealer has a unique value proposition, and this one is so critical to me because we often think about price, and I work for TrueCar, right? We're obviously focused on giving consumers upfront pricing through our dealer body, but the reality is that even with an upfront price, the consumer needs to have a differentiated value, something that helps you stand out relative to other dealers. And at the end of the day, that has to be grounded on how it solves the consumer's pain points. Not the value that we perceive as important, but how does that translate to consumers? And I think that's one of the struggles, I think, from an automotive retail standpoint, is how do I differentiate myself from the Ford dealership down the street when we're selling the same product? So let's start with the consumer pain points in the car buying process. If we want to have value that differentiates us, we need to understand what these are. So if you don't mind yelling out, what do you think when we ask consumers, and by the way, they kept a diary, they actually videotaped themselves sending in their pain points when they were in the car buying process. What do you think they told us? Let's throw it out there, yell. Time, I heard time, absolutely. What else? Negotiation, yep. Confusion, did I hear confusion? Yes, confusion all over. Is there any particular area you're thinking of when you say confusion?
The whole car buying process.
In the entire process, beginning to end. Yep. You know, I think he brings up a good point in that when you're in the business yourself, a lot of times everything's familiar with me. If I want to buy a car, I don't buy a car like a normal consumer. So we can't take for granted that it can be quite confusing. What else? Time, negotiation. Trust. It's a really good one. I don't know who said that, but trust, a very good one. It's a big hurdle there, right? You could be the most trustworthy dealer, but most consumers are coming in with a little chip on their shoulder, right? You're as good as the guy they worked with before you. You're as good as the guy they worked with before you, right? So, well, any others? Transparency, right? Being open. Any others? What was that? What was that?
Making a mistake in the buying.
Making a mistake in the buying process. I like that, right? I think when we think about as a consumer, you just don't want to you don't want to pay more than your neighbor, right? It's all comparison to your circle. You could actually have made a mistake, but as long as it's nothing worse than the guy next to you or the girl next to you, you're okay, right? So absolutely. Here's a couple that came up, and I just kind of put them into themes. But one of them was waste of time. By the way, that is the consumer that's actually sending us their little video in. But that's the consumer, and this guy says the absolute worst part of the experience was the waiting. The salesperson kept going back and forth with the sales manager on every little thing. So oftentimes we have these processes built in place, right? You have a green pea, and there's no way you're going to let him handle a deal by himself. He needs to get approval. But remember, from a consumer standpoint, what are they thinking when that salesperson leaves back and forth? What are they thinking? Collusion, right? That I'm getting screwed over. That consumer may not understand why this has to be. The online disconnect. This is something that we typically see, and it gets more complicated as you're working with multiple vendors. But this consumer said they did not have all the information up front and surprised us with a bunch of fees that we did not see on their website. So once again, there's a lot of confusion from the online to the offline. The information they might see on the website isn't matching what they see when they go in the store. The lack of transparency, I think you mentioned that up front, so the prices aren't transparent. They may have to come into the store to get it. They're not necessarily able to see it. And part of what's driving that is the expectation set from all the other products they buy. Any other product they buy, they typically have a lot of information up front. Validation, I think this one's an important one, a little different than transparency. Remember I said I want to know that I'm not necessarily paying more than my neighbor. You may give me the best price in the world, but how do I know it is a fair price? Are you proving to me why it's a fair price? This person said it was a hassle to figure out what you're really going to pay and figure out if it's a good deal. Not the lowest deal, but a fair deal. And the last one is pressure. I put slash of lack of customization. So this person says, the salesperson did not listen to anything we said. He kept trying to sell us, not on what we wanted, but what he wanted. So they're kind of pushing us down a path without necessarily allowing me to skip some of the steps in the purchase process. Right? Today's consumer isn't necessarily on step 1 of the process. They might be on step 4. Am I going to have to start over and go through step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Am I going to have to start over? So I always say pick the deal up where the deal left off. Meet me where I'm at. And if I was on a third party and I had an upfront price from you, treat me like I'm already on this step in the sales process. So those are the pain points. And the question is, how does your marketing address those consumer pain points and information gap? How does your marketing address those? Are we emphasizing in our marketing and really in our sales messaging, our pitch to consumers, how we're solving those pain points? And so we wanted to take a look at that from a consumer standpoint. And so in this survey of consumers, we asked them 2 different questions. So one, we asked them, when thinking about your decision regarding which dealership to visit, tell us how important each of these attributes were when selecting a dealership. And we had various different attributes about the dealership and value props. And then we asked, how difficult or easy was it to obtain this information about the dealership? In other words, when you were shopping various dealers, were they all mentioning it, meaning it was really easy to understand whether dealers had this value prop or not? Or was it difficult, meaning you didn't hear a lot of dealers talking or emphasizing this? So this is a little bit of an eye chart. Don't get intimidated. I'm going to explain how this one works. So if you're looking at the chart, and if you're looking at the right of the chart, these are things that are very important to consumers, according to that survey. They said that these are factors that basically drove them to select a dealership. Anything to the left of the chart are least important. I'm going to populate the chart in a second. And then if you're going up and down, anything at the top of the chart was hard to find. In all honesty, that means it was unique. It was a unique value prop that a lot of dealers weren't emphasizing. Anything at the bottom of the chart was easy to find. Most dealers were emphasizing. So if you think about yourself, or let's make it a little easier, thinking about other dealers in your area, what kind of marketing messages do you guys hear them emphasizing? In their commercials and online, on their website? Discount, right? Absolutely. Price is definitely one part of it. Yep, you hear a lot of that. What else do you hear them emphasizing and why you should shop at their dealership? Easy credit, right? So they're talking about people with challenge credit. What else? What was that? Inventory, right? I have the car you need, absolutely. Anything else? What about when they win awards? What do we hear? I'm the number 1 Ford dealer in your area. Anybody ever hear that one? Right? I'm the number 1 dealer in the area. We are a proud industry. When we win, we like to talk about it. Absolutely. So some of those came up. So let's start with the bottom quadrant. This isn't exactly where you want to lean all of your marketing value props on because it's not as important to consumers and it's very easy to find, meaning a lot of dealers are bragging about it. The number 1 volume leader in the area is one that came up. Right? So I'm the number 1 dealer. Now you would think, why wouldn't that be important to consumers? You're the number 1 dealer. That should mean something. And I'm not saying it doesn't, but I'm saying we have to take a step further beyond saying we're number 1. Why are we number 1? What does that do for the consumer? I think of it, I call it the WIFM, right? What's in it for me as a consumer? And telling me you're number 1 doesn't quite translate to what that means for me. So we got to take it a step further. And then prior purchase experience with the dealer. So this is basically a customer saying, hey, I bought there before, but that's not necessarily was the most important thing for me to buy from them again. So we think of loyalty, and there is loyalty in the store, but oftentimes I may not see the guy or gal I dealt with when I bought the car the last time when I come in again. Right? That person may not be at the store, and it's all about that personal connection. So that one did not come up as important. All right, let's move up. So these are things that aren't as important relative to the other ones, but they're hard to find. So these are unique things that are not mentioned a lot. So let's start with the family-owned, right? That makes sense. Not every dealership is a family-owned dealership. You're not going to hear that as often. But once again, what's disheartening is that wasn't necessarily what drove consumers to purchase from a dealer, right? Just because it was family-owned. Once again, we have to translate what does that mean for a consumer beyond the fact that it's family-owned. And same thing, buy a car online, right? I'm a big fan of digital retailing, so I want to be clear here. But I think a couple things are happening. One, when you look at the digital retailing experience, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, it's not exactly meeting consumers' needs, right? Having that button on the site, there's so much more to it to digital retailing than having that button. And I think a lot of consumers, for that reason, aren't going to say that that's the most important thing for them. And many consumers aren't necessarily ready also to do everything online. And that's one of the myths we'll talk about. So let's move on. These things on the right corner are important to consumers, but dealers are bragging about it a lot. So it's not necessarily a differentiator. So I think someone mentioned inventory is in here, having a large inventory, very important to consumers, but every dealership is going to be talking about the fact that they have a large inventory. So not necessarily a differentiator. The other one I want to point out in here is reviews, right? We've done a good job in automotive retail at embracing reviews, right? But we're at a point now where everybody has done a good job of thinking about reviews and embracing it. So it's not necessarily making you stand out from the crowd. So what's most important is in this top right quadrant, because these are important to consumers and they're unique value props. So if you look, we mentioned price discounts, and certainly consumers are looking for some upfront price information. They're not necessarily saying discounts, but they're saying, hey, show me what the price is up front. If you look at the average dealership website, it can be quite confusing. I might see the MSRP, then I might see the e-price, and then there might be a button that says, get another quote, right? So it's very confusing on what is the price. Trade is in there. You can see having upfront trade offers. So it's the same theme of getting upfront transparency. I want to also point out the fairness of the price. So how does that compare? What benchmark do you have that shows me that's a good price? A specific contact person, right? I think oftentimes we think about, you saw down below that loyalty to the dealership didn't necessarily drive me to buy from the dealership again, but certainly loyalty to a person or knowing that this person understands my experience is important. Incentives and rebates, the ease of the paperwork process or F&I, and then no pressure experience. So you think about your marketing and advertising, and are we covering any of these? Are we covering and emphasizing these in our slogans, in our website, on our TV and commercials? And are people talking about this as a unique value prop, assuming we have some of these things in place? So I want to give you a couple examples of what that might look like. But before we go in, I think the key is to take an inventory of your key differentiators. What I typically find when I work with stores is they have so much good happening already, but when I go to their website, I don't see it. It's not talked about. The one that always stands out for me is charitable efforts. I think we are one of the most charitable industries in the world. And a lot of times you don't see that, right? So take inventory of what you're doing today. And then take inventory of are we communicating that to consumers? Or maybe there's something we're willing to adopt. We've been talking about doing this, and it kind of meets that criteria of being a unique differentiator. And let's think about how we can start emphasizing that. And then the second thing is to develop a consumer why buy. Champ BMW in Colorado, I always use them as a great example of, they're a one-price store. They could have stopped there, but they talk about the power of one. And if you go on their website, you'll see the power of one. One price, one person, 1 hour. Right? So they not only do a good job of their actual strategy, but they do a better job at marketing it. And when everyone answers the phones, you hear about the power of one. It's infiltrated throughout all of their marketing channels. And that's the second one, or the third one is we have to distribute this everywhere. So once we come up with our inventory of differentiators, what's our why buy message that is consumer focused, we got to make sure that everybody at the store from a marketing level and a sales level is singing from the same song sheet. So a couple examples. No pressure experience came up. It's kind of hard to read, but I'll help you out here. The store on the left has what they, on their website, and these are all website snapshots, a hassle-free car buying experience. They talk about low upfront pricing. They talk about an express trade appraisal. And the last one is non-commissioned sales consultants, right? That is an indicator when we talk about your low pressure. It's one thing to say low pressure. It's another thing to have proof by how you're paying your sales consultants. So they do a good job of spelling out what that means. They're hitting at that pain point. The dealership on the right, what really stands out is they're talking about sell your vehicle here, and they say no obligation. So what they're trying to emphasize from a pressure standpoint is we want to buy your car. We're interested in buying your car, and you don't necessarily have to buy another car from us, right? Which is just emphasizing and leading with low pressure. We talked about the specific person. That was another opportunity in that one top quadrant. What we find, and we power USAA auto buying program, what we find is our military customers want to know that the person they're dealing with understands the USAA program, right? So this is an actual template from a mystery shop where he says, I will be your dedicated USAA member auto buying advisor here at the store. Right, so he's emphasizing, he's not just talking about his own dealership, he's leaning in to the trusted source that consumer came from. Upfront pricing. This is a dealership that has upfront transparent pricing, but what I think they do well is spell out exactly what that means for the consumer. So you can see they talk about the competitive upfront no hassle approach to pricing. More importantly, they give us the methodology on how they came up with that. Extensive research on comparable vehicles. We establish a market-based price considering model, trim, and options. So this isn't just a price we came up with. This is based on real data and insights. And then they talk about the value for the consumer. We save you time and money. Right? We eliminate the traditional negotiation. So once again, they're selling the value props that completely tie to the consumer pain points. Upfront trade offer. This is an example of a response from a trade, true cash offer. But I think what they do a really good job of is selling, once again, the experience for the consumer. You have a true cash offer. This is going to be a simple and transparent selling experience. They talk about the benefits of having that offer and what it means and how to redeem it. So they're doing a good job of describing it. This is Del Grande in San Jose here in the Bay Area. They do a good job of validation. So they have a price on every single one of their vehicles, and next to it they have a third-party source to kind of give a reference on whether this is a fair price or not. Another example from an F&I experience, this dealership does a good job of really describing for the consumer, you can arrange your financing from the comfort of your home. Right? So they're describing that process, how the convenience of not having to necessarily go into the store. A lot of digital retailing solutions. Like I said, we own Dealer Science, where you can give an upfront value in terms of a payment and a lease payment. So same kind of thing. If we have these kind of solutions, we need to make sure we're leading with that. All right, myth number 2. This one's going to be, this might be, make some people get a little riled up, but I think in the industry we've heard a lot of this. I can generate leads more efficiently on my own. I can generate leads more efficiently on my own. And it's understandable. As a retailer, wouldn't it be perfect if everybody just went to your website, didn't shop any other dealership, you didn't have to spend any other money outside of your own website, and you can generate a sale? But I think we have to balance what we want and also make sure that it aligns with consumer behavior. Otherwise, we can find ourselves spending more money on our own than we would have if we would have used another channel. All right, so when you look at the digital marketing spend increasing over the years, we saw that earlier. I want to break that out a little bit more. This is Burrell Research. They track all of the different advertising across industries. And you can see that the largest increase in spend when we talk about digital ad spend is in paid search and display. You can see it's a 60% growth in paid search and display by dealers in the last 2 years. It goes along with what I'm saying. I've heard dealers say it. I want more first-party leads. I want to get off the third-party drug. I want to do it on my own. So a couple things I want to point out from a consumer standpoint. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that paid search or display is bad at all. It's absolutely necessary. But you got to make sure you're fishing where the fish are, right? And so you want to make sure that you're not just looking at one channel. Really, it's diversifying channels. Consumers are using multiple sources in the consumer buying experience. In fact, the average consumer on according to J.D. Power, I think, went to 10 different websites in their experience. So it's not enough to say, I only want them coming to my dealership website if they're going to be using other sources as well. At the end of the day, consumers have a fundamental need to comparison shop. Whether we try to prevent it or not, they have a fundamental need to comparison shop. And it's not driven by automotive. It's actually driven by other industries. How many in the room are Amazon Prime members? Okay? Probably a little more than half of us in the room, right? We have been conditioned by the Amazon experience. I am irritated if I can't order something and it doesn't arrive the next morning. Just irritated, right? And we've been conditioned. We used to not be like that. Now we're angry if it doesn't arrive in the same day in some cases. You think about buying a house and going to Zillow, right? Now, and I just bought a house a couple months ago, and now I was looking on my own. I wasn't relying on my realtor the same way I was when I bought my first home. I could look at the information on my own. Think about when you're looking up a vacation property on Airbnb, you have all this comparison. Even when you're looking up a date on eHarmony, you can compare, right? Compare people. So everything we do is about comparison shopping, validation. And it's not going to change even when buying a car. It's hard to switch that mentality. So back to the research we did, we see that consumers are relying on various sources during the shopping process. So when we looked at those consumers, remember that we were tracking, they went in the stores, you can see that 8 out of 10 of them went to a dealership website during their experience. Another 8 out of 10 went to, that's a third-party website, it's getting cut off here, but a third-party website. And you can see that 7 out of 10 of them went to an OEM website. So they're going to various different sources. It's very difficult to figure out how do you track them only through one channel. So the other thing I'll challenge you, and this is a little bit extreme, this is a real website, by the way. I cannot even believe it, not in America. But the other thing is, if we're going to want to draw traffic to our website, we got to make sure our websites are optimized for the consumer. This is a dealership. I think this dealership is in Europe somewhere. I could not believe that this is a real site. Now, we're not as bad. Most of us have better websites than this. But the reality is that we may not be bad as this, but a lot of times our sites still aren't necessarily satisfying the consumers. Right? We have buttons everywhere. The user experience is cluttered. Consumers aren't getting the information they need. It's not addressing their pain points. And so while we want consumers to come to our websites, we have to think about, if we're going to compete against other channels and other websites, are we meeting their needs in the same way as those other sites? Because if we're not, it's hard to get a consumer to say, I'm only going to shop at the dealership's website. Okay, so we've got to optimize our site, make sure that if we're going to send traffic there, that it's going to meet the consumer's needs, and they're going to be able to navigate and get the information they need. I'm going to quote Brian Pash here. How many of you are familiar with Brian Pash in the room? Brian Pash is kind of at the forefront of digital marketing efficiency. One quote he said is, it's not easy or efficient to get an engaged in-market shopper to your website using Google Ads. Very provocative statement there, right? Very provocative statement there. And here's some of the things when I saw his last presentation that he kind of quoted. And you might see this typical AdWords report, right? Where you're getting all these metrics and you get the clicks and the conversions, and you're seeing how each of your campaigns that are driving traffic to your website are working. In this case, this is a real dealer AdWords report that Brian shared. This dealership was getting 386 conversions to their website. Hard conversions. I mean leads, calls, chats, text messages, right? So leads, calls, chats, and texts. They got 386 consumers coming from these campaigns actually doing these actions on their website. They were spending $25,000, right? And I will tell you, over the last 6 months, we've been working very closely with our dealers to understand this particular topic. This is not out of the ordinary, right, of spending $25,000 to drive traffic to the dealership's website. Now here's the challenge, is what is the intention of a consumer that shops for Santa Monica Ford? What is the intention of a consumer that shops for Los Angeles Honda, right? And what Brian found in a lot of his research of looking at thousands of Google ad campaigns is that a consumer that searches for that, their intention isn't always to buy a car, right? Their intention is not always to buy a car. So we may deploy marketing dollars to this to generate new car buyers, but they're actually reaching out to the dealership for service. Now the owners and the GMs in the room might say, well, hey, I like service. It's very profitable. But if I'm your marketing manager, don't hold me accountable if you give me a marketing budget of $25,000 to sell new cars when I'm really helping out the service department, right? Donations. When they listened to the phone calls, a lot of times they were asking for donations. Or what about, can I reach out to Bill, an employee at your dealership? Right? I don't know the dealership. I'm going to search for the dealership name and get the phone number so I can call the dealership. So we really need to sift through our spend and what we're actually getting from it that actually results in new car sales. In Brian's research, and these numbers are a little adjusted, he found that about 15 to 20%, I think it's about 20% now, of the calls that came from paid search were actually for people in the market for a car. Only about 20%. Some of the calls were for service, parts, other things. About 50 to 60%, that's actually 50% of chats were for sales. Most of the leads that were submitted on the site, on the dealership's website, that came from paid search were for sales. That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes you get duplicates, but majority for sales. And then another 50% of text messages were for sales. This is looking across all of these different campaigns. So now back to the dealership that had 386 conversions. This is his real reporting. Not using those percentages, but using certain services like Car Wars that has dynamic number insertion where you can actually track the nature of these calls. And you can see that really 140 of those conversions were actually for people that were actually shopping for a car. Leads, calls, text, chats in the market for a car. That changes your ROI completely. Before, you had 386 conversions, $25,000. That's about $65 per lead or per conversion. At a close rate of 10%, about $650 per sale, right? Oops. But after the adjustment, looking at the real conversions that were for sales, all of a sudden we're spending about $1,800 per sale. That's not the cheapest cost per sale I've ever seen, right? That's pretty expensive. And we can argue that my close rate's higher, it's 20%. Well, it's still $900 per sale, $700, $900 per sale. So what I'm trying to say is this isn't an attack on paid search. We absolutely should focus on driving traffic to our site. But we also have to inspect the ROI. We can't assume that because it's coming from Google or paid search or display that all of a sudden it's way more efficient than spending money with another channel. And I think this, to me, we need more inspection in this particular area. So best practices. One, we got to optimize our websites, making sure that if we want to drive traffic to our site, if we really want consumers not to go to other third parties or to other channels, that we're offering the same value. We're giving them their needs and basically helping them with their pain points. We got to make sure we're diversifying our marketing spend, right? Fish where the fish are, not put our money in any one bucket. And lastly, paid search. We definitely have to do paid search, but we want to make sure that we have visibility to inspect our results. Visibility beyond the ad agency that might be coming in to give you a report. Your own visibility. Someone in your store should be able to inspect what you're getting out of a spend on paid search. All right, most consumers prefer to purchase online. So we've been hearing a lot about digital retailing, and as I mentioned in full disclosure, we've entered into that area as well with Dealer Science. When we survey consumers, what we find is a little different than maybe a lot of digital retailing vendors are telling you out there. A lot of times what I hear is consumers are tired of the car buying process. They want to do everything online. I mean, if they could just sit at home and never leave their house and you just brought the car to them, that's exactly what they want. What we found is when we asked the consumer, do you prefer to negotiate the price rather than just paying the asking price? 90% said they prefer to negotiate. How many of you guys believe that? Say amen. How many of you believe that? They would prefer to negotiate. I'm surprised more of you aren't raising your hand. Because I hear dealers say that. Oh, the consumers, they say they don't like to negotiate, but they do. I find that they typically do. So this one's a little loaded. I would say that most consumers hate the negotiation process, absolutely. But they think that it is a must-do, that they have to negotiate. Because if I don't negotiate, if I don't play this game, I'm going to overspend. So most consumers don't like negotiating, but they're saying, listen, ultimately, if it comes down to me paying more, I'd rather negotiate. 90% said, I agree with the comment, I wouldn't buy a car without test driving it first. And 82% said, I prefer to buy a car in person rather than doing everything online. So what I'm here to tell you as a digital marketing, someone who works at a digital marketing vendor, a third-party website, is the dealership is here to stay. That consumers absolutely don't want to eliminate the dealership or the personal touch, but they do want it to be better. They want it to be better, but they don't want to eliminate the personal touch. Another thing we found when we asked these consumers who were, remember we were tracking, they left the dealership, we asked them and we tracked how many dealerships did they actually visit. How many of you have heard that the average consumer visits 1.2 dealerships in their car buying process? How many of you heard 1.6 dealerships? Okay, I've just been hearing the number go down and down and down and down and down. Right? In most presentations you hear, it's like consumers aren't going to any dealership. They're going to one and then they make their decision. What we're typically finding, it's about 2.4. That's a big difference. 2.4 and 1.2 for statisticians in the room is a big difference. And what's surprising is about 50% of the consumers that we track, this thousands of consumers, actually visited 3 or more dealerships in their process. Right? So once again, I just want to make sure that we level set when we're hearing these consumer trends and that we have some healthy skepticism that it's not that consumers don't want the personal touch in the car buying process, but they do want some improvements. Even the tech giants value a physical location. You can see Apple and Amazon all have storefronts in their process. So, a couple ways to think about this going forward. Remember the old gas stations where you had full service and self-service, right? So someone would either pump the gas for you, you paid a little bit more, and then other times you could pump it yourself, right? We need to think about the car buying experience in that way, right? What full service option do you have for consumers that want the entire experience? Meaning that they're willing to pay more if you delivered the car to them. If you delivered the car paperwork to them. From a service standpoint, if you delivered the car to, there are consumers that want that level of experience and are willing to pay more. Not a lot, it's not going to be the majority, but you certainly have a segment of consumers and probably a unique differentiator if we offer that level of service. But at the same time, how can I do self-service at your dealership? Right? Because there are going to be consumers that want to do everything on their own. They've done the research, they've picked the car, they don't necessarily want to go through the steps of the process in the order that you want them to go in. So how can I skip a step? How can I jump forward? And do you have a service level that adapts to each of these consumers? It's not about going and swinging the pendulum all to one way like digital retailing. It's about offering these different levels of service. I always use Paragon. I mean, they're very impressive, obviously dealership in New York run by Brian Benstock. So impressive in their Paragon Direct service. They will bring the car to the consumer to actually test drive it at home so the consumer can drive the car in their own neighborhood. Their service is even, in my mind, more impressive. They have 24-hour service technicians that are working on cars day and night. You can drop your car off at 4 p.m. to them. The service techs will work on it overnight and the car will be ready in the morning, right? So revolutionizing how we think about service, how we think about sales, and bringing the car to the consumer. Basically bringing the showroom to the consumer and bringing the digital experience into the showroom. They do the best job. My strategy with digital consumers is different than walk-ins. It's hard to believe that we still differentiate consumers in that way. When I think about the internet department, and this is not a debate on whether there should be an internet department or a BDC, it can work either way, but when you think about it and you really just step out of your automotive shoes for a second, every consumer is a digital consumer. Every consumer is a digital consumer. How many consumers go online to shop for their vehicle while in the shopping process? How many, what would you guess? All of them, okay? I'm surprised it's not 100%. J.D. Power says 8 out of 10 will use the internet in their shopping process, so it's shocking that it's not 100, but you're right. Most of them are using the experience. A very small percentage of them are actually submitting a lead. So we have an internet department working with a small segment of consumers when the entire set of consumers that comes in your store are digital consumers. So we think about it a little differently, and I think the biggest miss right now, and the opportunity, if I was to be more positive, is that connection between the offline or online and the offline. We struggle with that. We put widgets on our site, and our people in the stores aren't familiar with what's in that widget. So consumers getting information online, and they're working with someone who has no idea. We might work with a third-party vendor. I've seen it in all my years where we're signed up with a third-party vendor, but we haven't trained the people in the store to know that we're signed up with that third-party vendor. So now the consumer calls and says, hey, I just went through TrueCore, I just went through USAA, I just went through the Sam's Club program, and the person answering the phone says, I don't know what you're talking about. We're not signed up with the USAA. Absolutely, you're signed up with the USAA, right? So we think about the connection points and how can we make them consistent? So this is an example of a third-party site. This dealer's on TrueCar Trade. They have the widget on the dealership website. In the showroom, the salesperson's aware of this, and it's pulling it up on the app. They're pulling up the trade information on the app. And of course, in our email templates and call guides, we're mentioning all of these sources when we see that the consumer came from this source. This is the perfect world, but what can we do to connect these dots? Because this is what causes consumers to mention transparency as a pain point. This is what causes consumers and really drives the trust gap. It's not that dealers are being dishonest, it's that the information is inconsistent. And the last thing, views, clicks, and leads equals sales. Goes back to what we were looking at when we talked about inspecting on paid search, inspecting your spend, making sure that you understand what you're getting for the money. Back to the paid search example, I think what's baffling is that most dealerships are do not have the visibility on what's going on. When I ask the average dealership, and I'm not going to ask you guys, but who has access to Google Analytics in your store? Right? It's not the easiest of tools, but that being said, the answer is typically not anybody, right? The agency comes in, they tell me what's happening, and I trust what they're giving me. So I challenge you that we have to get in the weeds here. 80%, according to PASH, of dealers do not have Google Analytics configured properly. So even if they have Google Analytics, it's not tracking the right things. It's not tracking leads, calls, texts, and chats. The visibility on what's happening is not there. Only 20% of dealers, according to the dealers he works with, had AdWords connected with analytics. So even if they had Google Analytics, when you go on the campaign page to look at your campaigns that you're spending on, there's no campaigns in there. The only people that have access to this is your agency. It's a little scary, especially if you're spending $2,000 per sale. So I encourage you, at least from a paid search standpoint, and really all of your vendors, to have access to whatever they're back-end reporting, to make sure that there's someone in the store that has access to that. Because at the end of the day, as vendors are going to push their own metrics. That's just the bottom line. Vendors are going to push the metrics that prove their value. Whether it be the VDPs that someone clicked on, or maybe it's a cost per click, or maybe they looked at the hours and directions. And vendors can be very savvy. I'm talking about my own here, but we can be very savvy at spinning things in our favor. But you as dealers have data to inspect that, because at the end of the day, you're trying to sell cars. You're not trying to get more clicks. You're trying to sell cars. You're not trying to get people to look at your hours and directions. And so there's ways to look at that, and I encourage you guys to really dig into that. I call it the 3 I's of inspecting marketing ROI. Anybody who has a silver bullet for this is lying. It's not easy, so I don't mean to make it sound easy. But we want to look at influence, right? How did that marketing source influence the consumer's purchasing decision? It's not enough to search for the dealer's name and you come up and I click on that ad and all of a sudden I'm paying for that when the consumer would have gotten to me anyways. That's not influence. We want to know how that source influenced the consumer. Did they get some pricing information? Was there some validation? Was there vehicle information that helped the consumer land on the right car? Whatever it is, how did that source help? Invested. How invested was the consumer in the purchase process? Oftentimes we might see a consumer land in your site and then bounce away. So yes, it was a visit to your site, but the consumer didn't engage and spend a lot of time. Or maybe it's a third-party site that makes it very easy to submit a lead. So you're in your CRM happy as can be because you got so many leads, but it doesn't necessarily mean those leads are quality. Consumers oftentimes use lead forms as a research method, right? They're using lead forms as a research method versus being really in the market to buy a car. And are they incremental? There's always going to be overlap. Any vendor that says they send 100% of consumers that you'll never ever see in your CRM before them is lying, right? There's always going to be overlap when consumers visit 10 different sites. That being said, you're hoping that a particular marketing channel doesn't have 90% overlap, that everybody they send you was already in your CRM or already on another third party. So we have the data to inspect this in our own CRMs. We have the data to inspect this in Google Analytics. And we just need to make sure we start paying attention because this is how we're wasting money. So I've given you guys a lot, and I'm sure there's more facts in this that I have not covered. But I just encourage you to look at the data-driven facts when we're making these decisions versus a myths or versus the trends that are being pushed in front of you by consultants, vendors, trainers, and really other dealerships as well. Because at the end of the day, the truth lies in the data and insights that are really at our fingertips. So that's all I have for you. I think we have maybe 5 more minutes, but are there any questions that I can answer before we leave? Did you guys get something out of this, I hope? Good, I appreciate it. Well, I want to leave my email address. It might be hard to read, but I'm at kwise@TrueCar. If you guys have any questions or any help that I can provide on anything I've talked about today, feel free to email me. I'm also on Twitter at KKWise11. I want to thank you guys so much for being at my session. I appreciate it.